Well, I think inflation's not going to go away. I just read James Grant's recent letter, and he talked about inflation. He talked about it in the context of the cost of war, which was very dark. It was not only dark in terms of the inflationary effects, but it was dark in terms of him saying that based on current estimates, if we got into a hot war with China, we'd run out of ammo in 3 weeks. And I'm thinking, well, that's a little scary because that could tell China, well, then it's time to get in the hot war with the U.S., right? It feels like the world's going to deglobalize. So no one specific event, although someplace like Israel looks like it could blow the hell up fast. I think Ukraine is actually calming down. I don't see a reason why China would push our buttons. I don't think they think on the time scale. Some people say, they're going to do it before, Trump's elected. I don't think they think on those time scales. Mao set up a 100-year plan. When was the last time a U.S. leader set up a 100-year plan, right? Except for the Founding Fathers, they kind of did. I think that we could be going towards a deglobalization phase. And that's just going to put an inefficiency. It's going to be inflationary for the U.S. because for the last 40 years, we've been buying very cheap goods from China, which has kept the inflation problem down because the prices are cheap when the laborers are being paid 20 cents an hour. Those days appear to be over. And if we bring production back to the U.S., and Trump's tariffs, someone made an interesting case. Trump's tariffs are not the same as Smoot-Hawley because Trump's saying we want foreign goods. You just got to make them here. And that's a different kind of an argument. So maybe that's a valid one, but it'll then cost a ton. And there's some evidence that when Chinese companies move their factories here and people get all excited, in some small town that looks like it's going to die and the Chinese buy the company and it can get pretty brutal too. They don't treat it as, okay, these are American workers. They treat it like we're going to expect the same out of these guys as we do out of the workers at Huawei or something like that. So it's not Skittles, rainbows, and sunshine necessarily for the workers, but it also, to the extent they have to pay more, we're going to pay more for the goods. So it's got a tariff feel even if they're making it here. Well, I see that chatter coming out of the West. So if you want to blame someone for the nuclear threat, I blame NATO because they keep talking it up, and I can't imagine a worse thing to do. I think NATO, as I like to put it, is willing to fight to the last dead Ukrainian, and I think we're getting close to the last dead Ukrainian. I think that we could amp it up by sending large numbers of troops into Ukraine from NATO, and that would then cause me to pull back on my opinion hard. But as long as we're pretending not to be at war with Russia, pretending Ukraine's at war with Russia, I think Russia's slowly but surely destroying Ukraine. And I also think that it was a truly unnecessary bloodbath. Generally, a proxy war is not a good thing, right? If you're willing to fight a war and lose your own people, there's some clarity to that. But when you're fighting wars, losing someone else's people, there's a moral problem with that I have. I have a moral problem with both, but a real moral problem when we're going to destroy Ukraine, but at least we'll hurt Russia. It's hard to distinguish a societal contagion where it kind of gets a life of its own and it's not being steered, but rather just some emergent change in attitudes that are not orchestrated from those that are orchestrated by power mongers within the United States to those that are orchestrated from outside the United States. So I think there's some reason to believe that whatever we're doing to destroy our civil liberties, that there are countries abroad that are happy to see this happen. And so you've got to figure they're in there throwing, flashbang grenades into the crowd, trying to rile them up. And so I think, for example, the gender movement is probably state-sponsored in various ways. I think they're probably making sure that every one of our young boys and girls is encouraged to switch teams for no obvious reason. And Hillary is just a wretched human being. It's hard to figure out why she would say it besides just being a wretched human being. The fact that they shut down open discussion of anything, the COVID story in some sense revealed how much they're willing to clamp down. You couldn't say anything. I have been agnostic on Israel and Gaza, but I will become unagnostic if I continue to see the narrative failing to be discussed thoroughly in our press, because that conflict has a potential of turning into a World War III, or at least a big messy thing that influences all of us in a very big way. I just don't think that we should be getting fed a narrative on something that's so important. I think we should be openly discussing it. But the people trying to shut down the discussion of it are problematic. The gold could be due to this BRICS meeting. It could be gold running because I think that the Ruskies and Chinese and other 20 some odd countries after they meet. This could be a sell the news thing because they're not likely to come out and say, okay, we're announcing the new BRICS gold-backed currency. So it could just be, as Fleckenstein says, the guessers are guessing what the other guessers are guessing. I got asked this by another podcaster who said, they're holding this thing in Russia. How important is that? How important is this BRICS meeting? I said, well, you just answered the question. We've demonized Russia with everything we can. And 25 pretty important countries just agreed to meet in Russia. And there's a lot of countries that are basically flipping us off in the United States. And I continue to think that there's a big power shift going on in the world. And the BRICS, which started out as an acronym that just included 4 big emerging markets unaffiliated, has now become a global alliance. Long term, I think the commodities look pretty good to me just because they took a pretty big breather. I was lucky to catch the run up from 2000 to 2010, 11, 12, 15 even. And I'm lucky to catch some of that downslope. But I think platinum's an interesting story because I think the internal combustion engine is not actually headed to the grave the way many think, and it's really been marginalized, so I like platinum. On the other hand, it's the opposite of the metals for me. I don't trust the price of oil, but I'm more likely to trust the ability of guys who pump it out of the ground to make money. If you put a gun to my head and said, or if you said, Dave, we're going to put you in a coma and we're going to wake you in 10 years, decide where you want to put your wealth while you wait for those 10 years. The commodities, oil, energy, things like that would be on the list along with gold, and it would not include NVIDIA. It would not include, the Mag 7. At one point I owned RSX, which is the VanEck Russia fund, for years. And to give you an idea how little, I owned 100 shares, right? I was thinking about this the other day. There's basically a post-it that I'm putting on my screen to say, don't forget Russia. And then I'm listening to one day Grant Williams said, if you really want to be contrarian, Russia looks like an interesting contrarian play. And that kind of caught my attention. And then as the Ukrainian war headed our way, I watched RSX go down the drain. And then the question is, was it going to go to zero or not? And I thought it was either going to be a great buy because it was trading with, it's sort of PE multiples of 2. You don't have to hang on to them for long to get your money back on that one. And then it went to zero. And I think I bought another couple hundred shares. So it was the day it went to zero. I'm not even sure I lost money that day, right? It's a small enough drop in the bucket. But I remind myself that betting on countries that have very little history of creating wealth and doing so dependably is a sketchy bet, which is why the platinum miners, which I've been high on for a number of years because they look so cheap and they had cash on the balance sheet and stuff like that. But I'm getting a little nervous that geopolitical problems in South Africa, and I may get out of those. And if I think platinum's a good play, buy platinum. One time Einhorn said that. He said, if you're going to play an idea, play it directly. So if you think platinum's going up, don't buy the miners, buy the platinum, that sort of thing. And platinum's been dead money for probably 15 years, right? It's really been stale. So it's one of the only metals that's gone through a long, protracted period of being dead money. They almost all have done some sort of roid rage and sometimes knock back to earth. But so it seems like platinum's day in the sun might be coming, given all the hatred. I think commodities themselves are a dangerous play. I think they go up and down in price. They probably track inflation. So I can do that with other vehicles that are less sketchy. But companies that do it, I think if we had a real market downturn, if I went looking for cheap stocks that paid you to own them, which means had a dividend that would survive, I would expect to find them in the commodities. Well, if you're predicting decades of pain, that's not going to change. Well, the correction, though, I think my model for a correction is a slow rot. Nominally, it may tread water, but it's going to tread water for years. It might go down some and rot. What I don't think it's going to do is go down, 30% and then bounce back. I think the V-bounce might have come to an end. That's the hunch I have. I don't think the Feds have the power to retrieve all the V-bounces the way they did for the last 40 years. Yeah, I think the story stocks won't do well in the decline I'm picturing. I think you should buy a stock based on the idea that it's a revenue stream. And if you can find a company that kicks out, 6 or 7%, and there's no reason to doubt that it will continue to kick out 6 or 7%, then you can ask the question, am I happy with 6 or 7%? And so I think the valuation should be determined honestly, which they're often not. And I think they should be viewed as bonds, royalty trusts, something like that. And so if you buy a company with a PE of 1, you're buying a company that's promising to kick out 1% a year. Well, the fourth turning doesn't say irrevocably. It just says a protracted period of pain and suffering. I think Howe's theories are good. When I read the fourth turning, it was both provocative and at the same time, you get the feeling he was trying to package it a little too neatly. Strauss and Howe were trying to make everything fit a pattern in a system that's much messier. But I thought the basic idea that human behavior cycles and that the four turnings span about a lifetime, which makes sense because the old guys, no one's asking Jimmy Carter's opinion now, right? And we certainly are in a period of great upheaval and this loss of free speech. I encourage people to read Jonathan Turley's book, The Indispensable Right, which is a brilliant, scholarly, and riveting discussion of how the battle for free speech has been ongoing since the Founding Fathers, including some of the Founding Fathers being a bunch of dickheads. I mean, they were not all sitting around going, oh, we should just be wonderful people. Adams was a total pain in the ass. Jefferson was a hypocrite. Jefferson supported free speech, got in power, and then started using the arm of the state to attack his foes. Madison seemed to be a purist. And so it cycles. It turns out, as Turley says, who's very scholarly, when the world gets dangerous and upheaving, free speech gets stepped on, and during calm periods, it seems to make a comeback. And so you say, well, the good news, therefore, is that it cycles, right? The bad news is that he's doing some interviews, as you can imagine, and he sounds like he's not sure we're going to pull out of this one. So he's not as sanguine as me, the way I stated it, the idea that it cycles. He said, we might have seen the last cycle. And once you get into a Soviet-style society, it's very hard to get out of that. If you read The Indispensable Right, you will read about events in history where, someone handed out pamphlets to oppose something the government was doing. They were factually correct. The guy got thrown in jail and the Supreme Court upheld it, right? And you go, what? How is that possible, right? And that went on, off and on, through the last 250 years. We're there again. I mean, we're jailing people. I still find the January 6th committee and the January 6th response. January 6th, the day was not that good, but we also, many of us think that would have been a peaceful protest if people hadn't been shooting flashbang grenades into the crowd and riling them up, and if Ray Epps and his team hadn't been in there trying to storm the Capitol building, as federal agents and stuff like that. So, and the fact that we put guys in jail for 870 years combined, I believe the real crime is not what happened on January 6th. The real crime is what began on January 7th.